My name's David, and I am 50 years old. I've been married to my wife Sarah for nearly 25 years. We have two children, Alex, 22, and Emma, 18. Our life together has been a series of ups and downs like any marriage. But overall, I believed we had a solid relationship. Alex was born when we were still young, in our mid-20s. His birth was a surprise, but we were ecstatic. Emma came along 4 years later, and our family felt complete. I worked long hours as an engineer, and Sarah stayed home to raise the kids. Our dynamic worked well. At least, that's what I thought. Over the years, we had our fair share of challenges. Financial stress, job changes, and the usual marital disagreements. But through it all, we managed to keep our family together. Our bond was tested many times, but we always came out stronger. Or so I thought. Sarah has always been the glue holding our family together. She's kind, loving, and incredibly dedicated to our children. She's been the perfect mother and a supportive partner. We enjoyed family vacations, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, and navigated the ups and downs of parenting together. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I cherished it. But recently I started noticing a change in Sarah. It was subtle at first. A missed call here, a late night out there. She seemed more distant, lost in her thoughts. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to the stress of our kids growing up and leaving home. Alex had moved out and was starting his career, while Emma was about to graduate from high school. It was a big transition for all of us, especially Sarah. Little did I know, those small changes were the harbingers of a storm that would unravel everything I held dear. It all began innocently enough. Emma needed a new laptop for school, so Sarah and I went shopping together. As we waited for the salesman to process our order, Sarah's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. I glanced over, curious, but she quickly silenced it and shoved it back into her purse. A small red flag, but I ignored it. Later that night, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling. We were lying in bed, Sarah engrossed in a book, and I decided to ask her about it. "Who keeps messaging you?" I tried to sound casual, not wanting to spark a confrontation. "It's just some old friends from high school," she replied, not looking up from her book. "We've reconnected on Facebook, and they're planning a reunion." Her explanation seemed plausible, but there was something in her tone that didn't sit right with me. I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. After all, Sarah and I had built a life of trust over the past 2 decades. Why would she lie to me? But that was just the beginning. As the days went by, the signs became harder to ignore. Sarah started going out more frequently, always with a vague explanation about meeting friends or running errands. Our conversations grew shorter, filled with empty words and strained silences. The distance between us widened, and I felt helpless, unsure of how to bridge the gap. Then came the moment that shattered my world. One evening, while Sarah was out running errands, I stumbled upon a dusty old photo album in the attic. It was filled with pictures from our early years. Our wedding, the birth of Alex, family vacations. As I flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. It was an old letter, yellowed with age, addressed to Sarah. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. The words written inside made my blood run cold. It was a love letter from a man named Michael, dated 20 years ago. The contents were explicit, detailing an affair they had during the early years of our marriage. My hands trembled as I read the damning evidence of Sarah's betrayal, a betrayal that had been hidden for 2 decades. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had lied to me for 20 years. And as I stared at the letter, another horrifying thought struck me. Alex was born around the same time as this affair. Could it be that he wasn't my son? I needed answers. Confronting Sarah about the past was one thing, but I had to know the truth about my son. I scheduled a paternity test without telling anyone, my heart heavy with dread. The results confirmed my worst fears. Alex was not my biological son. The ground beneath me shattered completely. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. And as if that wasn't enough, I soon discovered that Sarah was having another affair, right under my nose. The betrayal was overwhelming, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. Discovering Sarah's first affair and the truth about Alex was like getting hit by a freight train. It left me disoriented and reeling, but I couldn't afford to let it break me. I had to focus on what was happening right now in the present. There was no changing the past, but I needed to understand the reality of my current situation. The changes in Sarah's behavior had become more pronounced. She was spending an increasing amount of time away from home, often with vague excuses. Our conversations had grown stilted, and the warmth that once defined our relationship had been replaced by a chilling distance. One evening, I decided to confront her about her frequent absences. I chose my moment carefully, waiting until we were both seated at the dinner table. Emma had already left for a friend's house, so it was just the two of us. "Sarah," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been going out a lot lately. Is everything okay?" She looked up from her plate, her eyes momentarily widening in surprise. "Oh, it's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just catching up with old friends, you know. With Emma about to graduate and Alex doing his own thing, I thought it would be nice to reconnect." Her explanation was plausible, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something. "Which friends?" I asked, probing further. "Anyone I know?" Sarah's expression tightened slightly. "Just some people from high school. You wouldn't know them. Besides, it's nice to have some time to myself. You should try it too." Her defensiveness only fueled my suspicions. I tried to push the conversation further, but she quickly changed the subject, asking about my work and any new projects I was involved in. It was clear she didn't want to discuss her outings any further. Over the next few weeks, I became more vigilant. I started paying attention to the little details. The way she dressed up more than usual, the way she always kept her phone close, even taking it to the bathroom with her. Her laughter on the phone, which she quickly hushed whenever I entered the room, only added to my growing unease. One night, while Sarah was in the shower, I seized the opportunity to look through her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, fearing what I might find. I went straight to her messages and noticed a recent conversation with a contact saved as Mike. My heart pounded as I opened the chat. It was filled with casual banter, nothing overtly incriminating, but there was a familiarity in their tone that set off alarm bells. Mike mentioned looking forward to their next meeting, and Sarah responded with a smiley face and a heart emoji. It was enough to confirm my suspicions. There was something going on, and it wasn't just friendly catching up. Determined to find out more, I started to monitor her movements more closely. I hated the idea of snooping, but I needed to know the truth. I noticed she always left the house around the same time and would return hours later, often with a vague excuse about running errands or meeting friends. One afternoon, when Sarah said she was going to meet a friend for lunch, I decided to follow her. I waited until she left, then grabbed my car keys and trailed her at a safe distance. She drove to a part of town we rarely visited, eventually pulling into the parking lot of a small cafe. I parked a few spots away, watching as she got out of the car and walked towards the entrance. My heart raced as I saw her meet a man outside the cafe. He was tall, with dark hair, and he greeted her with a hug that lasted a beat too long. They went inside together, their heads close as they talked. My suspicions were confirmed. Sarah was seeing someone else. The betrayal cut deep, reopening the wounds from 20 years ago. But this time I was determined to confront her and get the truth out in the open. I stayed in my car, watching them through the window of the cafe. They seemed so comfortable with each other, laughing and talking like old friends. It was a stark contrast to the strained conversations Sarah and I had been having lately. After about an hour, they left the cafe together. I followed them as they walked to a nearby park, sitting down on a bench under a large oak tree. They continued talking, their body language intimate and familiar. At one point, the man, Mike, I assumed, reached out and took Sarah's hand. She didn't pull away. The sight of them together was like a dagger to my heart. I wanted to confront them right then and there, but I knew I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed concrete evidence of her infidelity. So I took out my phone and snapped a few photos of them together, hoping it would be enough to start a conversation when the time came. I drove back home, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions. The betrayal felt fresh and raw, but I also felt a strange sense of resolve. I had been blindsided once before, but this time, I was going to face it head on. I needed to know the full extent of Sarah's deception and decide what to do next. As I sat in the living room, waiting for Sarah to return, I tried to steel myself for the confrontation that was inevitably coming. The pictures on my phone were damning, but they were just the beginning. I needed to hear it from her, to understand why she felt the need to betray me again. When Sarah finally walked through the door, I was ready. It was time to uncover the truth and decide the future of our fractured marriage. Sarah walked through the door, a slight smile on her face as she set down her purse. I watched her, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. This was the woman I had loved for nearly 25 years, the mother of my children, and she had betrayed me again. But this time, I was determined to get the truth. "Hey," she greeted, her voice light. "How was your day?" "It was fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Can we talk?" Her smile faltered slightly and she looked at me with a hint of apprehension. "Sure. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I know about you and Mike." Her eyes widened in surprise, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I followed you today, Sarah. I saw you with him at the cafe in the park. I took pictures." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I had taken. Her face went pale, and she looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "David, I can explain." "Explain?" I asked, my voice rising. "Explain how you could betray me again? How you could lie to me and our children? After everything we've been through, how could you do this?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, David. I never wanted to hurt you. It's just, I felt so lonely. You've been so distant lately, and I needed someone to talk to." "Distant?" I echoed, my anger flaring. "I've been working hard to provide for this family, to give you and the kids everything you need, and this is how you repay me, by having an affair." "It's not like that," she sobbed. "Mike and we just reconnected recently. We were old friends and it just happened." I shook my head, disbelief and anger churning inside me. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I've found out? How long has this been going on, Sarah? How long have you been lying to me?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "It started a few months ago. We just met for coffee at first, but then, I don't know. It got out of hand." "I'm so sorry, David. A few months?" I repeated, feeling a cold numbness settle over me. "And what about Alex? Does he know?" She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "No, he doesn't know. Please, David, don't tell him. It would destroy him." I turned away, trying to process everything. The weight of her betrayal was crushing, but I needed to stay focused. "We need to talk to the kids," I said finally. "They deserve to know the truth." "Please, David," she pleaded, reaching out to grab my hand. "Don't do this. We can work through this. I love you." I pulled my hand away, unable to look at her. "You should have thought about that before you started cheating on me. I can't trust you anymore, Sarah. This isn't something we can just work through." She broke down completely, her sobs filling the room. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I had to be strong, for myself and for our children. This was the reality of our situation, and it was time to face it head on. I walked out of the living room, leaving her crying on the couch. I needed some time to think, to figure out how to approach Alex and Emma with the truth. I knew it would shatter their world, but they deserved to know the reality of their mother's actions. The next morning, I called Alex and Emma into the living room. Sarah was there too, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. The tension in the room was palpable as we sat down, the kids sensing that something was very wrong. "What's going on, Dad?" Alex asked, looking between Sarah and me with concern. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the hardest conversation of my life. "There's something you both need to know. Your mother has been having an affair." Emma gasped, her eyes filling with tears, while Alex just stared at me in shock. "Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sarah broke down again, unable to speak. I continued, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I found out a few days ago. I followed her and saw her with the other man. I have pictures." I showed them the photos, and Emma started crying, her sobs echoing in the room. Alex looked at his mother, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. "How could you do this, Mom? How could you lie to us?" Sarah tried to reach out to them, but they recoiled, the hurt evident in their eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt any of you." Emma ran out of the room, her sobs growing fainter as she disappeared upstairs. Alex just sat there staring at his mother with a mixture of
and sadness. "I trusted you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I thought we had a good family. How could you ruin everything?" Sarah broke down completely, and I felt a mixture of anger and pity. This was the woman I had loved for so long, the mother of my children, and now she was the source of so much pain and betrayal. As the days passed, the tension in our home was unbearable. Alex and Emma barely spoke to Sarah, and I kept my distance, trying to figure out what to do next. The reality of our situation was stark and unforgiving, and I knew that our family would never be the same again. I spent countless nights lying awake, replaying the events in my mind. The images of Sarah with Mike, the look of betrayal on Alex's face, and Emma's heartbroken sobs haunted me. The pain was overwhelming, but I knew I had to be strong. I had to find a way to move forward for myself and for my children.
One evening, after another long day of tense silence, I decided it was time to confront Sarah again. I needed to understand why she had done this, to get to the bottom of her betrayal. We sat down in the kitchen, the weight of our unspoken words heavy in the air. "Why, Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do it?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, David. I felt so lonely, so disconnected. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like I was losing you." "Losing me," I echoed, my anger rising. "You should have talked to me, Sarah. We could have worked through it together. Instead, you chose to betray me, to betray our family." She shook her head, her sobs choking her words. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I love you, David. Please, let's try to fix this." But as I looked at her, I realized that something had shifted inside me. The love I once felt for her was overshadowed by the pain of her betrayal. I couldn't see a way forward for us, not after everything that had happened. "I don't know if we can, Sarah," I said finally, my voice heavy with sorrow. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The words hung in the air, a bitter truth that neither of us could deny. Our marriage was shattered, and there was no going back. As I stood up and walked away, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. But I also knew that I had to face it head on, for myself and for my children. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to find a way through the darkness and into the light. The house had turned into a silent battleground. Days dragged on in a tense, unbearable quiet. Every interaction was laden with unspoken accusations and barely restrained emotions. Sarah and I had tried consulting a psychologist, but the sessions were fruitless. The wounds were too fresh, and the betrayal too deep. We stopped going after a few sessions, realizing that therapy couldn't mend what was broken beyond repair. One evening, as I sat in the living room, lost in thought, Alex walked in. His face was a mask of confusion and hurt. He had been avoiding Sarah, spending most of his time out with friends or locked in his room. Emma had taken to staying at a friend's house, unable to cope with the tension at home. "Dad," Alex began, his voice hesitant, "I need to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit down. "What is it, son?" He took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I don't understand why Mom did this. I thought we were a happy family. What did we do wrong?" I looked at him, my heart breaking for the pain he was in. "You didn't do anything wrong, Alex. This is between your mother and me. Sometimes people make bad choices, and it hurts everyone around them. But why?" he pressed, his voice rising. "Why would she do this to us?" I knew the time had come to reveal the truth about Alex's parentage. It was a conversation I had dreaded, but he deserved to know. "Alex, there's something you need to know. Something I've kept from you for a long time." He looked at me, confusion and fear in his eyes. "What is it, Dad?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Alex, when you were born, your mother had an affair. The man she was with, he's your biological father." Alex stared at me, disbelief and shock etched on his face. "What? No, that can't be true. You're my dad." "I am your dad," I said firmly. "I've raised you, loved you, and been there for you every step of the way. But biologically, I'm not your father. Your mother kept it a secret from both of us until recently." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he shook his head, trying to process the revelation. "How could she do this? How could you both lie to me? I didn't know, Alex, I said, my voice breaking. I only found out recently, and it shattered me. But it doesn't change how much I love you. You're my son, no matter what. He stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger and betrayal. I need to talk to Mom. I watched as he stormed out of the room, my heart heavy with sorrow. Moments later, I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. I followed, my stomach churning with dread. How could you? Alex was shouting at Sarah, his face red with anger. How could you lie to me my whole life? Sarah was crying, her hands trembling as she tried to reach out to him. Alex, please, let me explain. Explain, he scoffed. You cheated on Dad, and now you're telling me he's not even my real father? What kind of person does that? I made a mistake, she sobbed. A terrible mistake. But your father, David, he's been there for you your whole life. He's your real father in every way that matters. Alex shook his head, backing away from her. I can't believe this. I can't believe anything you've said. You've destroyed our family. He turned and ran out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Sarah collapsed into a chair, her sobs filling the room. I felt a mix of anger and pity as I watched her, knowing that our family had been irreparably damaged. We need to find him, she said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. We can't just let him go. I nodded, grabbing my car keys. I'll go. Stay here in case he comes back. I drove around the neighborhood, searching for any sign of Alex. My mind raced with worry and fear. When I finally found him, he was sitting on a bench at the park, his head in his hands. I parked the car and walked over to him, sitting down beside him in silence. After a few moments, he looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I thought I was protecting you, I said quietly. I wanted to keep our family together. But I realize now that keeping secrets only makes things worse. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I don't know what to do, Dad. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. I put my arm around him, pulling him close. We'll get through this, Alex. It won't be easy, but we'll figure it out together. You're my son, and nothing can change that. We sat there for a long time, the weight of the truth settling between us. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with pain, but I knew that we would find a way through it. Together, we would rebuild our lives, one step at a time. The weeks that followed were a blur of strained conversations and raw emotions. The air in our house was thick with tension, and every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope. Emma had distanced herself, spending more time at her friend's house, while Alex was grappling with the truth of his parentage. Sarah and I barely spoke, our once vibrant relationship reduced to cold civility. The betrayal gnawed at me, day and night. I couldn't shake off the image of Sarah with Mike, their laughter and intimacy playing in my mind on a loop. It was driving me to the brink of madness. I needed to reclaim some semblance of control over my life, and that's when the idea of revenge took root. I knew it was petty and vindictive, but I couldn't help it. The desire to make Sarah feel a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me consumed my thoughts. I started by gathering every bit of evidence I had. The photos, the text messages, the dates and times of their meetings. I compiled it all into a dossier that painted a damning picture of her infidelity. But simply confronting her again wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the humiliation and regret. I wanted everyone to know the truth. I knew exactly how to do it. Sarah worked at a local nonprofit organization, a place where she was well respected and held a significant position. They had an annual fundraising gala coming up, an event where the town's elite would gather to support their cause. It was the perfect opportunity. I arrived at the gala alone, dressed in my best suit. Sarah was already there, mingling with guests, her smile radiant and her demeanor as if nothing was wrong. It made my blood boil. I stayed in the background, waiting for the right moment. When the event was in full swing, and most of the guests had arrived, I made my move. I walked up to the podium where the microphone was set up for speeches, and tapped on it to get everyone's attention. Excuse me, everyone, I began, my voice steady. I have something important to share. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned towards me. I saw Sarah's face among the crowd, her smile faltering as she realized it was me. I apologize for interrupting, but there's something I need to address publicly, I continued, my gaze locking onto Sarah's. Sarah, my wife, has been having an affair. I have proof, and I think it's time everyone knows the truth. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I held up the dossier, flipping through the photos and text messages. "This is Mike," I said, showing a photo of them together. "They've been meeting for months behind my back. Sarah has betrayed our family, and I want everyone to know what kind of person she really is." Sarah's face turned ashen, and she stumbled forward, trying to reach the podium. "David, please don't do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. But I was resolute. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on me, Sarah." The crowd was in an uproar, whispers and shocked exclamations filling the room. Sarah looked around, her eyes wide with panic and humiliation. She tried to speak, but no words came out. I left the podium feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. I had exposed her for who she really was, and there was no taking it back. I walked out of the gala, my heart pounding, my emotions a mix of triumph and despair. The fallout was immediate. Sarah's reputation was in shambles. News of her affair spread like wildfire, and she was asked to take a leave of absence from her job. Our social circle was divided. Some sympathized with me, while others criticized my public shaming of her, but I didn't care. I had done what I felt was necessary to reclaim my dignity. At home, the atmosphere was even more strained. Sarah barely spoke to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and regret. Alex and Emma were caught in the middle, their loyalty torn between their parents. It wasn't fair to them, but there was no turning back. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Sarah approached me. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. "David, we need to talk," she said quietly. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But what you did at the gala, it was cruel." "Cruel?" I echoed, my anger flaring. "You betrayed me, Sarah. You lied to me and our children. You humiliated me. I just returned the favor." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no pity. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My job, my reputation, my family. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't," I said bluntly. "There's no fixing this. We're done, Sarah. I want a divorce." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "If that's what you want, then I'll respect your decision. But please, for the sake of our children, let's try to make this as amicable as possible." I nodded, knowing she was right. The kids had already been through enough. "Fine, but know this. I will never forgive you for what you did." She stood up, wiping her tears. "I understand. The process of divorce was a painful one, but it was necessary." We agreed on a settlement, and Sarah moved out of the house. Alex and Emma struggled to cope with the changes, but we tried to provide them with as much support as possible. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself slowly healing. The anger and bitterness began to fade, replaced by a sense of determination to rebuild my life. I focused on my work, my children, and my own well-being. One evening, as I sat on the porch, Alex joined me. He had been distant since the revelation about his parentage, but I could see he was trying to come to terms with it. "Dad," he began, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Mom. About you. About my real father." I looked at him, my heart aching for the confusion he must be feeling. And I've realized that it doesn't matter who my biological father is," he continued. "You're my dad. You've always been there for me, and that's what counts." I felt a lump in my throat as I reached out to hug him. "I love you, Alex. No matter what, you're my son." He hugged me back, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew that as long as we had each other, we would find a way to move forward. Sarah's betrayal had left deep scars, but it had also taught me the importance of honesty, trust, and resilience. As I looked out at the setting sun, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future, a future where I could rebuild and find happiness once again. The divorce was finalized, and Sarah had moved out of the house. The process had been emotionally taxing, but it was also a necessary step toward healing and rebuilding. Alex and Emma were still processing everything, but we were slowly finding our way forward as a new kind of family. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the structure and routine it provided. The house felt emptier without Sarah, but it also felt more peaceful. The constant tension and mistrust were gone. replaced by a quiet determination to create a better future for myself and my children. One evening, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in the living room going through some old photo albums. Emma, who had recently returned from her friend's house, joined me. She sat down next to me and started flipping through the pages, a soft smile on her face. "Remember this?" she asked, pointing to a picture of us at the beach when she was little. Her hair was wild from the wind, and she had a huge grin on her face, holding up a seashell she had found. I smiled, the memory warming my heart. "Yeah, I remember. You were so excited about that seashell. You carried it around for days." Emma laughed, the sound filling the room with a sense of normalcy that had been missing for so long. "I still have it, you know. It's in a box in my room." We continued to go through the album, sharing memories and stories. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a step toward healing. We were starting to rebuild our bond, piece by piece. As the weeks passed, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I started going out more, attending social events and trying new activities. It felt strange at first, stepping back into the world as a single man, but it was also liberating. One evening, I decided to attend a local community event, a charity run to raise funds for a local cause. I wasn't much of a runner, but I thought it would be a good way to get out and meet new people. As I lined up at the starting line, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. The run was challenging, but it was also invigorating. I found myself pushing through the physical exertion, feeling a sense of accomplishment with every step. As I crossed the finish line, I was greeted by cheers and applause from the crowd. It felt good to be a part of something positive, to contribute to a cause and be surrounded by supportive people. After the run, I was mingling with the other participants when I noticed a woman standing nearby, looking at the event schedule. She had a friendly smile and an easygoing demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Hi," I said, approaching her. "Did you run the race too?" She turned to me, her smile widening. "Yes, I did. It was tough, but fun. How about you?" I nodded, feeling a spark of connection. "Yeah, it was my first time doing something like this, but I really enjoyed it." We introduced ourselves. Her name was Claire, and we started talking about the event and our shared experiences. It turned out that she was also recently divorced and was looking to rebuild her life. We bonded over our similar situations, sharing stories and offering each other support. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I continued to see each other. We went for coffee, attended more community events, and even started running together on weekends. Our friendship grew naturally, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. One evening, as we were sitting on a park bench after a run, Claire turned to me, her expression serious. "David, I just want to say that I admire your strength. You've been through so much, but you're still here, moving forward." I looked at her, feeling a warmth in my chest. "Thank you, Claire. You've been a big part of that. Meeting you has been one of the best things that's happened to me in a long time." She smiled, reaching out to take my hand. "I feel the same way." As the days turned into weeks, our relationship deepened. Claire became a source of comfort and joy in my life, helping me to heal and move forward. We took things slow, both of us mindful of the scars we carried from our past relationships. But with each passing day, I felt a growing sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as we were sitting on my porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me, her eyes filled with warmth. "David, I know it's still early, but I feel like we have something special. I want to see where this goes." I looked at her, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. "I feel the same way, Claire. Let's take it one day at a time and see where this journey leads us." As we sat there, holding hands and watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. The pain and betrayal of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had found a new beginning, a chance to rebuild my life and create new memories with someone who cared about me. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. I had my children, my friends, and now Claire by my side. Together, we would navigate the challenges and joys that lay ahead, one step at a time. And with each new day, I felt a little more whole, a little more like myself. Life had dealt me a difficult hand, but I had found the strength to rise above it. And as I looked out at the horizon, I felt a sense of gratitude for the new beginning that lay ahead, filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.